Hey guys, it's Courtney from Cosmic Clarity Astrology, and I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about the Libra Lunar eclipse that's happening on March 25th, kicking off, of course, eclipse season, where we're going to have one more eclipse after this, instigating some pretty big changes that have the potential to unfold over the course of the next 6 months. So let's get into it. We're going to look at what this is for all of the signs, which you can find them listed in the description box down below. So make sure that you go ahead and jump to that for your sun and rising sign. So this eclipse, as I mentioned, it's a lunar eclipse, which indicates a full moon. The moon is at 5 degrees of Libra and the sun at 5 degrees of Aries. So let's start off with Libra. When we look at 5 degrees of Libra, according to the Sabian symbols, there is some meaning associated with teaching the true inner knowledge to one student. And the word true really stood out to me for this, especially because the ruler of this eclipse, Venus, is sitting next to Saturn in the sky. And Saturn, I think, definitely has its hands in what is true, what is fact, what is reality. And I think that oftentimes Libra moons and strong Libra energy in general, especially with Venus also in Pisces, it has a little bit more of this kind of passivity to it. It can be a little bit less head on and direct and honest. And in order to create balance in the status quo, it can often self-neglect or be less authentic in its expression. And so when you have really strong Libra in general in your chart, you have to be aware of, am I people pleasing? Am I not being really as honest as I could be? Am I using humor to skate around an issue, or am I just not bringing it up altogether because conflict is uncomfortable or because I don't want to be disliked? So I think that if that has been going on in the past, this eclipse is going to draw any of those tendencies to the surface and have us actually be quite frank with people. And that's not really the typical energy that we see with a Libra full moon or with a Pisces Venus. This is really, again, atypical. These are much more passive, friendly, go with the flow type of signs. Very relationship oriented, very understanding. And I think that's going to help us get like a well-rounded picture of what this eclipse has to offer, because it's going to give us some of that really sensitive, compassionate, relationship-oriented energy. But we have the sternness of Saturn here, because Saturn, again, is sitting next to Venus, the ruler of Libra, the ruler of the eclipse. And so we're getting that sternness, that fact orientation, that truthfulness of Saturn that is unescapable or unavoidable. And we also have the directness of the sun being in Aries, along with the North Node, Mercury, and even Chiron, which are all conjunct together in the sign of Aries. So there's something to be said here for being quite direct and forthright in your communication with others. And I think that could be somewhat challenging in the sense that I think sometimes having direct communication can also come out as confrontational or as defensiveness, especially with Venus and Saturn together. There can be this kind of coldness that happens with Saturn and this guardedness that happens with Saturn that can really make the direct communication less effective and a little bit more detached. And in that sense, the communication style itself doesn't lend itself towards understanding and coming together in harmony like a Libra moon wants. So that is something to be aware of, that the ultimate goal here with a Libra full moon eclipse is to really bring people together on the same playing field and the same page. That doesn't mean that you have to reignite a relationship and reconcile. That doesn't mean that you need to, have to be together in some way, but it does indicate that there is a common ground and an understanding between both people. And I just saw 444. So it's basically about stabilizing the relationship and sharing something that is maybe honest and vulnerable and direct without guarding one's heart too much, or hiding, or becoming defensive, or having egoic reactions, which are the shadow side of dominant Saturn, dominant Aries energy. So those are things to consider. We're really trying to, again, come onto the same page in some type of way. And for many people, that might look like ending some kind of commitment, especially in relationships that they're in, because Venus and Saturn together are kind of typical for relationship endings. That's not always going to be the case. Sometimes people might actually decide to commit deeper. It's going to vary a lot depending on what's going on in your chart. But for some people, this might be a conversation of closure around ending a relationship. For other people, this might be deciding to approach your relationships differently and think more seriously about them and think more about the long-term effects of things. I think for everyone, there's going to be some general awareness of boundaries, because Venus in Pisces doesn't always have boundaries. And with Saturn moving through this sign, it's really trying to help us become aware of where we have this separate sense of self, where we have the boundaries, where we maybe need to feel more empowered, or when we need to surrender. And this understanding of kind of what I have control over versus what the universe has control over. And also what should be within my domain separate, and what should be within maybe somebody else's domain as separate. And that's very much related to boundaries. So I think that there could be some themes and topics that come up around that. And I think I see boundaries as a really wide and disparate theme. It's not like, oh yeah, boundaries, like this person kept calling me and I told them not to. I think that's an obvious way to have boundaries, but I think boundaries can trickle out into much more abstract or philosophical things, or much more minute things, or within our relationship with ourselves, with the universe. I think it's a little bit more, it's bigger than just like having this direct boundary with someone in a relationship. So I think that the idea of boundaries, standards, expectations, communicating our inner emotions and our needs and our desires and our wishes, while also, again, having that kind of realistic groundedness of Saturn, I think is really important. So that's going to look so different for different people. For some people, they might be fixing their relationships and redefining what that looks like. Some people might be ending relationships and deciding what they want in its place. And some people might be committing to a dream or a vision that they have with somebody because of this strong Piscean energy. On top of this, the ruler of the moon, Venus, is also making a sextile to Jupiter. So I do think that, and Uranus, because they're conjunct in Taurus. So I really do think that whatever is happening right now, it's like we're doing something for the greater good or our highest version of ourselves. If we are committing further into something, then it's because we really see that helping us grow as a person and being in our best interest. If we're ending a relationship, it's because there's probably a different relationship that we could see ourselves in, even just in a dream state, that would actually be better for us in the long run, or we feel like there is more potential in terms of our own growth happening within a different environment. And so I think whatever happens at this eclipse, we could have this kind of assessment of what we're valuing and prioritizing, especially when it comes to our dreams around relationships and what we're wanting for those kinds of things. So this doesn't have to be about relationships, although Venus and Libra, I mean, this is just very predominantly like centered around that. So I would assume that it is. This eclipse has the south node conjunct the moon. Whenever we have that, there is some type of energy of the past resurfacing, especially because Saturn is also on Venus. So Saturn brings up things from the past often. So there could be past people, past issues, things that you thought were done or, that you wanted to be done that resurface for you to really make sure that that's not what you want, or that you want to do things differently, or that you could have behaved better. In some capacity, there's an ability right now to kind of rewrite history in a way of what you want the past to have been. And that's usually when somebody comes back into your life and you kind of address things, you talk about things, and you decide maybe what would have been better. And this doesn't have to be someone from the past. It could be an existing relationship with an issue from the past that comes back up. And you're like, well, what would have been better in this situation? How can I rewrite this in a way where I don't continue that story or that narrative or that pattern, and decide that I'm going to choose differently in my relationship moving forward? So I'm really getting the sense that like there are things also in our relationships that we maybe have kept hidden from others, maybe even from ourselves to some degree. But I feel like there's a little bit of energy here of not everything being disclosed, keeping our cards close to our chest, thinking something but not fully saying something. And this could really vary from person to person and to what degree, but I'm getting the sense that some of what's being called out of us at the time of this eclipse is this complete truth, or being willing to expose yourself and your feelings or opinions about something that maybe you were not fully disclosing before. That might not be totally true for everybody, but I think there is going to be some level of this needing to bare your heart to someone, or be frank with somebody, be direct with somebody in a way that maybe was hard to do before for whatever reason. And I think this is some kind of test around that. So if there's a need to have a relationship and confront what's really going on in the relationship, that might come out around the time of this eclipse. So just be aware of that. This is also very much a time of filling up our own cups. I mean, this is a Libra eclipse, which is obviously about relationships, but we're still having the North Node in the Sun in Aries. So there's something still about this period of our lives throughout this whole year, but especially during Aries season, where we're really asked, what would make me feel satisfied? What is my plan for the future that would make me feel excited to wake up every day? What's something that I can do to fill up my own cup and emotionally satiate myself so that I'm not codependent or relying on others or lacking necessary boundaries or feeling like I need to get my needs met through other people? How can we fill ourselves up? And again, know what is the proper boundary of what to outsource versus what to take care of ourselves. So I'm really getting the sense of like an independent energy, where old relationship patterns are being resolved so that we can have greater happiness and confidence and fulfillment and independence within ourselves. And that could still be within the relationship, or it could be alone, depending on your situation. So I think that's generally what I'm seeing here. I'm excited for this eclipse. I think it looks like an overall interesting one. I think because Venus is sextiling Jupiter and Uranus, I'm getting the sense that this is having an ultimately positive outcome if we decide to lay the necessary foundations and make these harder hitting decisions, or take responsibility for something, or be very clear in our communication, be wise in our discernment of our like long-term decisions. If we're able to do all those things, or some of those things, I really think it's going to put us on a good path with that sextile to Jupiter and Uranus to have a lot more stability and a lot more contentedness, and maybe even simplicity or ease within relationships moving forward, and within our own sense of value and self-worth. If we are unable to make those decisions, I could see issues perpetuating at this eclipse and maybe coming to a head and having some coldness, or being overly subjective, overly emotional. I mean, this can come across in lots of ways, especially because Mars is also in Pisces. So I think that there's a lot of like passive aggressive energy, sidestepping, getting hits, or expressing emotions in these convoluted ways. And I think that is when things can get really complicated and messy. So we have a choice here. And what are we going to choose? I hope the option that is best for our soul evolvement. But yeah, just make sure you go ahead and check out your sun and rising sign, which I will link in the description box down below. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe, share with your friends, and have a beautiful day. Bye.